Just want to make sure that my translator can hear me. Yes. I want to welcome everybody. So this is the third and final camp meeting in the United States. And we're joining you today from California. And I know it's Sabbath for some people already, but tomorrow on Saturday, Sabbath, we'll have 2 presentations. So there'll be 3 this weekend. What we've done in the last 2 camp meetings is that I've asked for participation from the congregation. And I know that for people who join online, it can be a little bit frustrating. So I apologize for that, but here in person, I think people prefer that, at least I do. Okay, with that, I'd like to begin. We've already opened with prayer. So it's been several weeks since the last camp meeting. And I think it was at the beginning of September that I did a single presentation with the French ministry, but it wasn't in person. So I'd like to ask somebody here, just maybe put your hand up and then you can go to the microphone, what you recall or what you remember from the last camp meeting, which was in Arkansas. Maybe, go ahead. Either some highlights or a very short summary of the last presentation. What do you recall we were talking about? Emmanuel, if you just go to the mic. And then Alyssa, if you wanted to go too. So this is just some admin at our end. When you speak, don't do long sentences and wait till I give you a nod, because it's going to get translated. So you can't just keep on speaking, and try to remember it's being translated and to keep your sentences short and to the point. Thank you. So.
Well, the question was about Sabbath. So
Can you hear that online on Zoom? Okay. Okay, so try again.
And when we more into that and try to explain that it is not about what people recover. It is about the things that change.
So I'm going to stop you there. Can you hear that online?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so they're picking it up on my microphone, so they can't hear that. So I'm just going to repeat it. So we had a discussion about Sabbath keeping. Anything else? Oh, that's Alyssa?
That started the New Rules podcast briefly, but made a point that it was a group experience that we were to have.
Okay, so I spoke about Sabbath keeping. And Alyssa mentioned about a podcast called The New Gurus. This is a nine-part series that talks about teachers. That's what the word guru means. And it's these new teachers. And the point that I wanted us to see about this was the tension between individualism and corporate or group. As you know, the word guru doesn't just mean teacher, it has a connotation, it's the spiritual teacher. So to put it simply, how do you have access to God? How do you have a religious experience? Depending on how you want to frame it, is it acceptable? Is it good or sufficient? Acceptable, good, sufficient. To have that experience on your own, or not just a preference, but are we required to have it as a group experience? So this is really about worship, as is Sabbath keeping, and they're addressing two different points. This was addressing the issue of how to keep Sabbath, how to worship God. And this is the same point, but this is discussing the subject of individualism or corporate activity. So I'm just going to ask people to put their hand up here, which you won't be able to see on Zoom. Who of you favor an individual experience, that you can approach God, that you can have a relationship with God, that you can worship by yourself on your own? Who thinks that's... Go ahead. Who thinks that's good, that's the right way to do it, and they prefer it that way? Okay, so we've got over 30 people. I think only one or two people put their hands up. And that it should be a group or corporate activity. Put your hands up. So here in our group, over 90% of the people said that it should be a corporate activity, worship should be. And what I wanted to show us, this has been a theme or a thought that I've spoken about several times now over the past few months. This shift to individualism. That we can manage our own lives in different aspects, but we're focusing on worship. On our own. And what I want to suggest, separate to the subject of COVID-19, which has weaponized or empowered this concept of individualism, long before COVID ever was on the radar, plans were afoot, plans were in progress to try to direct humanity to have this concept of individualism, to prefer that. And the thing is, in the scriptures, you will never see that model being introduced. It's always a corporate activity. And I want to just remind us, whatever lesson you may learn from the story of Noah, was that a story about individualism or a corporate activity? Put your hands up if you think it was an individual act, and then in a minute it was a corporate act. Individual. So I'm going to repeat the question. Just in the story of Noah, it's a story about salvation. Is that story of salvation in a framework of individualism, or is it a corporate activity? Individual. Okay. Corporate. So most people think it's a corporate activity.
Could it be both?
So Victoria says, could it be both? I'm going to say yes, I think it could be. But I think the point I wanted to bring up, which I think most of you are in agreement with, that this is a group or corporate activity. Salvation cannot happen as an individual. And whatever you may or may not believe about that story, and its application to end-time prophecy, what's one of the most troubling and fascinating aspects of that story for you? Because for me, what's fascinating about that story is not how few people get through. Depending on how you count, how you do your calculations, a large percentage of those people who were saved were sinners. And as Victoria said, salvation couldn't have happened without Noah. But there are sinners who are saved into the new world, into the new earth. And I think that's a concept or an idea that Christians just would never contemplate or even accept as truth. So I don't know what individually you think about that idea. That we just ignore that part of the story, or it's not going to be fulfilled in that way. Without making any firm conclusions about it. I think there's much more to learn about that aspect of the story as it comes to corporate activity than we perhaps realize. Okay, we spoke about Sabbath keeping. And I was going to say surprising to me, but I don't know how surprising it really was. It ignited a lot of discussion. And if you remember, the point that I wanted us to consider was not the context or the dynamics of the individual that asked that question. It's not that that person is irrelevant, but I think for our purposes, the reason why they're asking, I don't think it was that relevant to us. So I wanted us to focus on not individually why that question was being asked, but corporately, why is that question being asked? Why is it important? Because I think this movement is in crisis. So there are people in the congregation here who are nodding. And I don't know why they're nodding, because I don't know what crisis they're thinking we're in. So in this movement, we speak about shakings often. And the shaking, that term, is a spirit of prophecy phrase that Ellen White has given to us. So I'm going to assume we all know what it means when I say there's a shaking in the movement. So what I'd like for people to do is to go back as far as they can into history. We'll begin at 1989, don't go before that. And tell me a shaking that happened. So we'll try to do it in chronological order as best we can. So someone put their hand up where they can think the first shaking that they remember in this movement. And I'm assuming we're all okay that this movement gets created in 1989. So that would be where we start. Kathy, give me the year first if you can. That's fine, I can hear.
2000.
So Kathy said the first one that comes to her mind is 2014. And what was the dynamic of that shaking? If you can give me perhaps a waymark or what happened.
The ministries that had come together with Teach for America.
So 2014, there was a split between, we'll just say, path of the just and there may have been some other associated people with that. They leave the movement. Kathy, what was the cause of that split? Just simply. So Kathy says it's the book of Joel that did it. So she says it was a doctrinal problem over an understanding in the book of Joel. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Gloria?
Specifically about the locust, did it represent Islam or
Okay, so Gloria has just given a bit more detail. She says in the book of Joel, it speaks about locusts, and there was an argument who the locusts represent, Islam or Babylon. Okay, another one. Alison. So it's the same one you're referring to? Is it the same year? I'm saying, is this? Okay, so another split that happens, Alison said, is about public evangelism. Who left the movement over that, Alison? Who split? Can you give me examples of who the everyone else was? So they're all part of the just people? So you're saying that they left because of public evangelism, not because of Joel? Okay, so Alison says people from Path to the Just split over the book of Joel and also over public evangelism. Anyone else? Maybe another one split. One before or one after? I didn't see who that was, sorry. Oh, 2019? So 2019, gender equality. So that's the subject. And who's splitting? Who's leaving or? Okay, so this is the split with FFA. And it was regarding gender equality, you say? Anyone else?
before 2019? I'm not sure of the year, but there was a split over the nature of man. 2017.
Okay, so 2017, It's about the nature of humanity. And who's split? Okay, so this was individuals that had that separated from us. So maybe not everybody's aware of that. It wasn't as publicized or as it wasn't a big fanfare. So maybe people didn't realize. Someone say something here? No? Any more thoughts? I'm going to put individuals. How come you didn't put Eatonville?
They were in my brain before you called on me to answer, but yes, Bill was the.
I'm going to put Eatonville. That's just a fellowship. Okay, so we've got 3 so far. Kathy McGraw at the back, you had your hand up.
I knew some people left, but that hadn't been.
Okay, so we're making it sound bad. It was international. Can't talk about international things in America. Sorry about that joke online. So I'm going to put 2016 because I'm international. And that's quite a significant one, by the way. Gloria, 16, you're going to do for us?
About 2016, about Matthew 13, about the parable of wheat and tares.
Give me the year for that.
2015, my guess.
Okay, so Gloria said something, and I'm just going to hold on to what she said and not translate it yet. We're going to look at International 16. Alison. Sorry? So I don't think the French ministry split in 16, no. So we talk often about 2 major battles. From ancient history. Raphia and Panium, or Panium, depending, I say Panium, but I agree with you. It's the proper way to say it, Panium. So Raphia and Panium. So that's your clue.
That Daniel, the purpose of Daniel about like he brought the first. Was that 2016? Because I remember they were in Canada in 2017. I was before they left.
Okay, so 2016 isn't that. So we agree with that. So I led you astray. I made a mistake on that. 16. Who leads the movement in 16? What did you say earlier, Gloria? Yes. So Gloria was correct. This is the wheat and the tares. So this comes up at 9/11 in Germany. So that's September. And by December, we've had a shaking over this subject. And who's the casualty? No? Mark Bruce. Yeah, so is that what you're going to say? Oh, it was Mark Bruce. So he leaves the movement at the very end of the year. He's not the only one, but he's the sort of the key person because he was the de facto teacher of this movement at that time period. If you were familiar with the activities at FFA, so we'll go on to 2017. Oh, we're here in 2017. So we've spoken about the nature of humanity, Eatonville. And so there's another one, which is Raphia and Panium. And I think that's 17.
Is there an album?
So yes, I think the Alabama group leave in 2017 as well, I believe. And that's a significant event. And the people who went to the early part of Daniel 11, who I will say discovered this, at the same time that Mark Bruce is leaving, they end up leaving as well. David. Yes, so this is a couple from the United Kingdom, Charitu and Kimberly. Kimberly, yes. Aaron, you had up ages ago. Which one?
Tree of Life, Mark Bruce.
So yes, let's put Tree of Life. That's better. Okay, so we've got 14, 16, 17, and 19. Can anybody think of something that happened before? No?
Well, it has to do with you.
Give us the year.
And where an issue of a shaking, I only know it from what it was told, but because of 2012.
Okay, so we've got the year 2012. And there's a shaking, and it's me. I don't have a ministry. And what's the shaking about, Kathy?
Time setting and Sunday law.
Time setting and Sunday law. Did anybody have their hand up? I wanted to make a comment. Did I miss anybody? Okay, so we've got 2012. This is that's the person, and the subject is the Sunday law, which is 2014, and time setting. Okay, so before we move on either side, I just want to make an observation. What you'll see in these years, that there are multiple things happening. Sometimes it's not just a single shaking or single issue. And the other thing I want us to point out, which nobody has so far, when we tell a story, we always have, I'm just going to use the word which I don't like to use, an agenda. A nice word would be a perspective. And all of you have been gracious because you've made all of these shakings doctrinal. These are all doctrines. I'm not saying we're going to go through this exercise, but it would be very easy for me and many of you to go through each one of these and give me another reason for that shaking. And it has nothing to do with theology or doctrine or prophecy. What's it to do with? Leadership. Dana said leadership. Anyone else? Christine.
Communication.
Communication. People don't communicate well. Alyssa. Personalities. People don't get on well together. Penny. Culture. This international thing that we mentioned a minute ago. We spoke about international affairs, which is a cultural issue. Anyone else? Truth is doctrine. Alison. Pride. Now we're getting in the mud now. Now we're going to start slinging mud. Kathy. Hurt feelings, which is related to personalities and perhaps even culture. Okay, so it comes down to me then, because no one has said it yet. Gender. So why do you say gender?
Well, I just remember what other texts said regarding Elder Jeff's comment about why is it she the one who has to be teaching that subject?
Okay, so your name, sorry?
Well,
Bell said that it's about gender because Elder Tess made a comment about something that Elder Jeff had said. Which was related to her gender when she speaks about the subject of gender equality. Okay, so for me, a theme that runs through all of this is the M word. Go, Penny. Great. Okay, so nationalism is the N word. And my accent isn't very good. It's the M word. And M stands for money. You go through all of this and you'll see a really clear trail of money. And obviously money comes in different forms. And you can clearly connect, which someone said, power connected to money all the way through this. There's a power struggle going on. And when I say money, it's not just literally people are, fighting who gets paid the most or where the money goes. But money is to do with inequality. And it does tend to be the people who've got the most money have the most power. Okay, so the point I want to make is that running through all this, it's not just a doctrinal issue. There's a personal or an interpersonal aspect to all of these shakings. And everyone who left, did they say, oh, I'm leaving because I'm wrong? No, they leave because they know they're correct, or they believe. And they said, it's better that I go and have an individual experience than a group one. So we might call it power or culture or personalities. And people might say that they're leaving over doctrine or worship. And I'm not saying that's not true. But what I want us to consider is how far you are willing to go with your neighbor when you don't agree on something. Because what happens in all of these shakings is people prefer an individual experience, worship experience, than a corporate one. And people will argue that they can't sear their conscience. So sear means to burn or to go against your conscience. And I want us to realize that you can't separate the personal from what I'm going to call the political. And what I've just done there is slightly manipulated the usage of those terms because we've discussed them in an earlier camp meeting. So people split, they separate because they're unhappy. And they're unhappy because they don't agree on the truth. Or there's a power struggle, or what we'll call an interpersonal conflict. And before you even had that conflict with either a group of people or an individual, the technology, the dynamics was already prepared to allow you to go down that individual path. And still feel that you have a level of integrity, independence, and honesty. So you believe that you can hold on to the truth by a thread, claim to be true to your conscience, while at the same time, I'm going to say sinning. And the sin that's being committed by the person is that they believe that they can have salvation as an individual experience, not a corporate one. So whether you see it as a political or a prophetic issue, or a personal or interpersonal one, you don't get on with a person or there's a power struggle, what you end up doing is believing a lie, because I'm arguing that the weight of evidence shows us that we're required to remain as a corporate body or a group. And Satan and Satan's agents are doing all they can to divide and conquer. So there are some shakings that happened before this, but we've got a fairly new membership, and many of us don't go that far back in our minds, so we're not probably aware of them. But 2012 wasn't the only shaking. There have been others. So we've got to 2019. And we're in 23 now, so that's 4 years ago. Any shakings after 2019?
Didn't the Grand Prix?
Okay, so someone, so your name again, Phil? Phil said the French ministry split sometime after 2019, which is correct. So I can't remember the year of that, but I'm not going to put that one down where a ministry splits. I will, if someone remembers the year, actually, I will put that in. I'm going to be told off when the French hear this video, because they're all sleeping at the moment. So we've given them some. So we're just right in the middle. Thank you, Shemaine, 2021. So the French ministry splits, and that you're correct about, that is a big issue. If you go back into that story, it's a story of power, money, and theology. Any else? Anyone remember anything else? Bob?
Wasn't there kind of a cultural split over the issue of dowry and all of that as it was shaking out? You know, everybody trying to understand that that's not part of equality.
So I'm going to say in a sort of a general aspect, perhaps from 20 to 22, Elder Tess in her presentations is dealing with this subject, that's particularly focused in Africa about the dowry system. But I don't think there's actually a shaking that happens. No one, individuals might leave, but there's no group of people that leave over that subject, really. Gloria.
Woman wearing pants.
So Gloria said, what about women wearing pants or trousers? That disturbed people, I don't think, but I don't think there was a split over that subject. And I think it happened in 2019 when trousers were introduced, or pants. And I think most men and women accepted that, except a few individuals perhaps. Aaron.
Go back before 2012.
Sure.
Was it Russell Williams and Aaron?
So in 2008, I'm going to say. We might say into 2008, 2009. One of the largest fellowships in the movement at that time was in the United Kingdom, and they split. And there again was doctrinal and interpersonal issues there. And also around the same time, we lost a large contingent of people from South America. And they were based, I believe, in Colombia and Venezuela. Aaron.
Suppose you consider it a shaking in the movement. But what about the 2520 and the conference church? That did affect people in the movement.
So Aaron's mentioned the 2520 and how the conference had rejected that message, and that affected this movement. What year do you want to put for that?
I think it was around 8-9 started. And we got this fellowship on that in 2012.
So I've got a UK, Colombia, and I've got the 2520. And people began to be disfellowshipped around the 2012 period. Okay, so I want to ask a question now. Are we in a shaking at the moment? Is this movement being shaken? Donna, what do you think?
I see it, but I don't really see it much.
So Donna says she doesn't think that we're in a shaking at the moment. Larry. So Larry says if we did have one, it would be over the Sabbath and over equality. I take it that means you can't see one. No. Fair enough? Okay. So I'm just going to put a question mark here. Not just because of the date, but Larry said the Sabbath and equality. So he said, if there is one, it's possibly over the Sabbath and equality. but he can't see one either. Alison. First of all, answer yes or no. Oh, you don't know?
Or being effective. And maybe, I don't know.
So individuals are having struggles. And that's shaking them. I just want to remind us, when we talk about a shaking, it means a separation. So they're leaving the movement because of some issue. Sorry?
They don't, they've already left. Emotionally, I'm here. They're still on.
Okay, so Alison is going to say that I said, so it must be correct, that people are struggling in, how did you describe it? How did I describe it? So she said, I mentioned this idea that people are here physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally, they're in a different place. David, what does the Bible call that experience? So, okay, so David said that that's the Laodicean experience. Here in body, but not in spirit. And which church has the Laodicean experience, Alyssa? Just give me the number or the name. 7.
Five, right?
7 and 5. They're identical churches. So number 5 and number 7, Sardis and Laodicea, are here in body, but not in mind. And both Alison and myself said that's a definition, apparently, of shaking. So I want us all to think about whether you agree that that meets the definition or the criteria of a shaking. Gloria.
There's the shaking of a radical feminist.
So Gloria said there's a shaking over the subject of radical feminism in this movement. So that would infer that whatever radical feminism means or is, what it means or what it is or what it looks like, Gloria and I would disagree. What are we being shaken over that about the subject of radical feminism? What's the difference? Why do you like it and why don't I like it? What's the shaking? Any thoughts, Gloria? No. Okay, so Gloria's put radical feminism, but she hasn't explained why, which is fine. Kathy.
kind of want to go back to Larry's question. Sabbath and equality, before we can even throw in radical feminism. In that, because I think we're being shaken over that. These are what you've been talking to us about.
So Kathy has said she wants to go back to what Larry and Gloria said. And Kathy says we are being shaken over the subject of the Sabbath, equality, and radical feminism. And if I understood her correctly, she says the evidence for that which the others didn't say is that I'm talking about it. So Kathy's saying, if I am addressing these issues, then it must be an issue, whether I realize it and I've got an agenda or God is doing something. However it's working, because it's being spoken of, it must be a subject of a shaking. One moment, Kathy. Jackie.
In the beginning, you said that the movement's in crisis.
So at the beginning of this meeting, I don't know if I said or if I asked if we're in a crisis, and some people and many people said yes. Carry on.
So to relate to that.
Right.
What we're saying right now.
Sorry.
What's being said right now is relating to that crisis.
So what we're discussing now, Jackie has said, is fleshing out or describing what that crisis is. And 3 subjects or issues have been brought forth. Kathy.
I was going to say, because specifically questions were like, okay, how can we now take, exams on Sabbath? And, we've had the discussions about attire. I mean, women, we don't, we can wear pants, we can wear whatever. So we've had discussions on and messages on these things. I want to be more specific. It's not just this general Sabbath, but there's been specific discussions and teaching and radical feminism. What is it? Is how do we, there's differences in people's understanding.
So the key point that Kathy has just brought forth is that there are strong, I used the word strong, she didn't, there are strong disagreements about how we view or how we approach these issues or what they mean. And what I said earlier on, I want to just cycle back to. It's not just theology or doctrine. There's an interpersonal aspect. And that overlays upon this subject here about the new gurus. I'm going to say the creation of the iPhone, and you'll remember that story. The tension between individualism and corporate activities. And without the lockdown that was created by COVID-19, we wouldn't be having this discussion. because I'm going to call it the agenda, which is not fair. Of all these gurus that have allured society or humanity to have an individual experience over a corporate one, that could never have happened on the scale that it did without COVID and the lockdowns that were associated with it. And this movement has become a victim of that. But there are individuals in our movement who have taken advantage of that. Advantage of the phenomena or the situation that confronts humanity, which means you can be in the movement, you can claim to be in the movement, and at the same time, just have an individual experience. Because you can roll up to church now, you can attend church, in your pajamas, because we have that ability to do it now. So we can claim or pretend to have a corporate experience when it's actually an individual one, because we're all doing our own thing. I used to go to a church where they forbade you from bringing water into the sanctuary. And now we have people having breakfast in the sanctuary. So things have changed a lot. So the point that I wanted us to understand on that people who have differences with their neighbors can claim to be in the movement in body, but I question whether they're actually in the movement in the spirit. Going back to the story of Noah, that time slot in that story is only, I'm going to say a couple of years, several months. I'm going to say sons in general. We might just pick on one of them. We might just pick on the men and not the women. But do you think they all became sinners when they entered into the new world? You don't think their father knew what the children were really like? These people are hundreds of years old. I don't know how, I can't remember how old they were, but they're not teenagers. The parents or Noah knew what his sons were like. So they enter into that experience in body, but not in spirit. So the reason why we've discussed that point is because all of these shake-ins and maybe this one's an anomaly, but all these shakings were both in ideology and physically. People split, people left. We no longer see them. And by that definition, we can't be in the shaking now, because no one's leaving. Now, we started this story months ago. With this podcast. And slowly but surely, I'm going to say we've either come to the stage or we're getting to the place where, if not all the pieces, at least some of the pieces are coming together now. Because once we take this idea about individual and corporate experiences, and overlay it over these shakings, compare, contrast, and combine. Remember, we do combine lines together. We do combine thoughts. 1 + 2 = 3. What I want us to see is that, according to the Laodicean experience, which is an old doctrine, that you can be in a place in body, but not in spirit. And I'm suggesting that that meets the criteria of a shaking. Because a shaking is a separation. And we know that there's a tension between the literal and the spiritual. And all those literal stories in the past have to be understood and looked upon in their fulfillment spiritually. So when Larry and Gloria and Kathy said, we're in a shaking and it's at least to do with these 3 issues, because I keep on going on about them over and over again. And therefore, Kathy said, by definition, you may or may not agree with her that that's a definition. As a minimum, she's saying he's not wasting his breath for no reason. So what I want us to see is that we're in a full-blown shaking. We might call it a crisis. But it looks and feels different to all of these ones. You can't target either an individual or a fellowship or a ministry. Say we had a fight with them and they left. But everything else, all the other dynamics remain the same. And remember, I'm saying that money is power. And as soon as you start talking about power, you know that these issues are related to the subject of power. So as we close, I want us to go away this evening thinking about the similarities and the difference between the shaking that we are in at this moment and all these other ones. So no one's used the word enemy, which is good, but I'm going to use that word. Because when you go through all of this, you see that this is a story of two protagonists or two enemies. And the difference between all of these is that now the enemy is within the gate. So Alison said earlier, you might be here in body, but your mind is somewhere else. Which means you've been shaken out, but you're still here. The fight or the exchange or the battle has already occurred, but you didn't leave. Whatever reason, you remained. And that's the difference between all of these, because they actually left. And that's why this one is harder to identify. And perhaps we think, I can't see any shaking. I can't see a real crisis. So if this is correct, it behooves each of us to examine ourselves and see if we're in the faith, of course. If we're here only in body, but not in spirit. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you that we have the gift of life, the opportunity to choose between what is right and what is wrong. And that, like you, we have the power of choice. The choice to do what Cain did, go into a path, into a land of his own choosing, or to remain in the kingdom of heaven, in your kingdom. As each of us departs today, may we take the opportunity to examine ourselves and to be certain if we are in the faith. Which can no longer be marked by our physical presence, but by our mental, emotional, and spiritual presence. help me, help each of us to be in the faith. Amen. Thank you.
Hi, we're so glad that you joined us for this this IPR California camp meeting. We hope you've been blessed by what Elder Parminder has taught tonight. And we ask you please join us tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.